Welcome everybody. My name is Emma and I am the Time to Change York project coordinator, and today I'm joined by two of our wonderful Time to Change York champions, and today I'm here with Lauren and Rhys. Hi both.
Hello.
Hello.
So today we're going to be talking about post-traumatic stress disorder, often known as PTSD, and also complex PTSD. So I think first, to start us off, it would be great, Lauren, if you could just briefly tell us what is PTSD and or complex PTSD?
Well, PTSD, as you said, Emma, is a post-traumatic stress disorder, and it's caused by experiencing or witnessing single, repeated or multiple traumatic events. Unfortunately, that's a bit textbooky, but that's how it is. It's a mental illness. Traumatic events are subjective, so not everyone who goes through the same traumatic event will develop PTSD. And complex PTSD is more likely to be developed if the trauma you've gone through is linked to something you're unable to escape from, happened over a long period of time, or was like a series of events. But not every person who has gone through trauma will develop PTSD.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. And that's really interesting. Thank you for that. And that will help, I think, certainly with my understanding as well. I think what would be really useful and interesting to know is how did, for each of you, how did your PTSD manifest, and what were your, hopefully this is the right word, what were your symptoms, or what are your symptoms if you've currently got them?
Okay, well, I'll go first. So with mine, my PTSD triggered a couple of years after the event, but mine was related to my mum having a major brain hemorrhage on a Sunday in August 2016, and my mum was rushed to hospital, and because of the state my mum was in, I was the only visitor.
Wow.
Mum was such a condition that no one else would visit, as it was very distressing. So Mum lasted 7 days, and as everything in these situations, my mum was breathing independently. So she slowly died from dehydration and starvation.
Oh gosh, sorry to hear that, Rhys.
And I stayed with my mum every day from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. in her hospital room. So jumping forward to May 2018, we were at friends for dinner when they received a phone call to say that their father had died. Now, we suggested we should leave, but as people do, they insisted we stay. Though I didn't know it at the time, this was a trigger event.
Wow, yeah, interesting. And in terms of symptoms, when you say trigger event, what did that trigger within you, Rhys?
It triggered flashbacks.
Okay.
So I was getting flashbacks of my experience of mum slowly dying in hospital. And I would also experience feelings of being my mum in that hospital bed.
Okay, wow, that's really interesting.
Mm.
Thank you for sharing that, Rhys, as well. Very honest, thank you. Lauren, what was your experience? I can imagine quite different. What was your experience and what are your symptoms?
I went through 2 separate periods of what's termed as emotional abuse. Across, it was sort of 2016 into 2017 over a period of about 6 months. And then there was one I experienced in the workplace by my then line manager in 2018, which went on for 11 months.
Wow, so quite a long period of time. And I suppose similarly with Rhys, what were or are your symptoms?
When I eventually got out of the situation, there was kind of, I thought everything was fine, and it wasn't until the end of 2019, I started to experience symptoms. I was triggered and started to have more anxiety attacks. I have generalized anxiety disorder anyway, but I'd been all right up until then. I started to get triggered by people who looked like my manager and reminded me of her. That my manager had ginger hair, and there was a person who looked quite like her that had just started at my new workplace, and every time I saw her, I went into a panic.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
I was startled quite easily. Like every time a door slammed at work or at home, I visibly jumped off my seat almost. I startle easily. Like people coming up behind me, I don't like it. I still don't like it. Nightmares. My mum says I used to shout out in my sleep. I used to get more headaches. I was exhausted most days from sort of high anxiety. I dissociated quite a lot as well.
Wow, so quite an impact really on day-to-day life, and quite a range of symptoms, which, if I'm totally honest, surprises me actually. So that's really interesting to hear that. I think, Lauren, if we just stick with you for a minute, be interesting to know, did you manage to seek any treatment at all for your PTSD? And if so, kind of what was it, if you don't mind sharing, and whether it worked and whether you've still got symptoms today?
I did initially go to my GP because that's the usual thing you do when you're feeling unwell.
Yeah.
And it kind of brushed me off a bit. And I sort of did some Googling, as you do. And I became aware of waiting lists of the NHS for PTSD. And I was just like, I can't wait that long because I can't live like this for like a year.
Yeah.
Because if you like, I was living in survival mode, and it's not nice. It's been exhausted day to day.
Yeah.
So I googled some PTSD treatments, and I found something called eye movement and desensitization therapy, which is like the gold standard treatment for PTSD. Which basically how PTSD works is that the memories that are traumatic, they get stuck in your brain. So how EMDR works is it basically allows your brain to process them, and it reacts to them neutrally instead of traumatically and triggering. So I ended up going private. Fortunately, at the time, I was lucky enough to be able to afford to go private. And basically how I found a counsellor was, again, good old Google.
Yeah.
It directed me to the, I can never remember what this stands for, backup, which is registered counsellors in York. And I picked one that looks about right.
Probably quite important then, just that point about, registered and kind of reputable as well, isn't it? And making sure that the person, particularly when unfortunately the waiting lists are so long for NHS treatment, I think that's a really important point, Lauren. Yes, seeking your own treatments, if you can afford it, is great. But like you say, making sure it is reputable is obviously a great idea.
Yeah. The treatment was really, really intense. Because if in effect for a while you are reliving it in the sessions.
Yeah.
But
did it work?
Yeah.
Sorry, did it work for you, the treatment?
Yeah. I'd researched beforehand because I knew what I was getting into. I didn't want to dive in and think, oh my God, what am I doing?
Yeah.
Yeah, it did work. I think I did it for 3 months.
Okay.
And
really?
It worked. It gave me my life back.
Oh, that is great to hear. That's really good to hear. So in terms of symptoms for you then, Lauren, are you symptom free, if that is the right phrase?
In terms of flashbacks and that kind of thing, yes, but I am still hyper vigilant. I do still startle easily, but I don't get the nightmares. I don't get I do occasionally get flashbacks, but they're not horrible and triggering. I don't get triggered anymore. And I'm back to my normal level of anxiety.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful and hopeful to hear that there are treatments out there that can be effective. And I think, Rhys, if we can go back to you, just really interested to see, did you manage to, manage is probably the wrong word actually, sorry, that sounded a bit patronising, but did you seek treatment or get any treatment or find things that you did for yourself maybe that works? I really don't know.
Well, for myself, because one of the things that happened to me is I became overwhelmed with thoughts of suicide to such an extent that I couldn't function, and this lasted for months.
Wow.
So it came to a situation at work that I just couldn't do anything. So what I did was I self-referred to IAP. That's the Improved Access to Psychological Therapies.
And that's the one through the NHS, isn't it,
That's
Rhys?
the NHS,
Yeah,
yeah.
brilliant.
So they further referred me on to secondary mental health support. It took a while to arrive, a couple of months. Meanwhile, I sought out counselling in York.
And was that private then, Rhys, similar to Lauren? Or?
No, it wasn't private, no. So what with me was I eventually I went through work. So through work, the work scheme, I got some counselling, but I also sought out counselling from one-to-one counselling in York.
Yeah.
And then in July, I was appointed a CPN, that's a community psychiatric nurse.
Yeah.
Who supported me through to June 2019. So with that, part of the working with the CPN, I did a 6-week course of 6 weeks of counselling with Cruise Bereavement.
Yeah.
But also we developed a crisis plan.
Yeah.
So this is a crisis plan that helps you identify when your triggers are, what works, what doesn't work, what to say to people if they're just saying, typically say, go have a bath, things like that, things that don't work.
Yeah.
And then probably by the end of 2018, I rewrote it so it became my plan. So I had full ownership of it.
Oh, brilliant.
And then so I was signed off work for 2 months, which looking back on it now was not long enough because of my role. I only had two months of covered sick pay, and then it would have been statutory.
Yeah.
So I went back to work, which was way too early. I shouldn't have really gone back to work with the state where I was in my mental health.
Yeah, and I think that's possibly a familiar story, possibly. So thank you for sharing that. And also, I think just want to go back to what you said, very comfortably, and I really appreciate you saying it, is that you had thoughts of suicide through your PTSD. And I just think for me, that just goes to show how serious and severe PTSD is as well. So thanks for saying that. I think it's a very important point to go back to that. This is a really serious condition, isn't it? And just thinking, Rhys, about all the counselling and treatment, it sounds as though you were able to get quite a bit of support. Again, a similar question to what I asked Lauren. Do you consider yourself to be symptom free, or is it an ongoing sort of condition for you, PTSD?
For me, it's ongoing, because I've looking back on it now and doing some reading up on PTSD, it's things like I have disturbed sleep most of the time. So I have disturbing, very vivid dreams. I'm really quick to become irritable and angry just over the smallest things. I'm just really short. I do avoidance. You don't realize you do avoidance, but I avoid situations. So I was in hospital for 8 days at the end of 2019. And for those 8 days, I consciously avoided thinking about my mum's situation. Because when you're sitting in a hospital bed for 8 continuous days, all these thoughts come back to you. So you're working on it all the time.
And I could, sorry, Rhys, just to say, Lauren was nodding away there if you didn't see that. So that sounds like a common thing for both of you. So just to, I'm not sure if you could see her or not, but that's, but yeah, do go on, Rhys, carry on.
And I've got an inability to concentrate. I can concentrate for maybe 10, 15 minutes maximum.
And again, Lauren is vigorously nodding to that. So
and my memory is impacted. I can't really remember things. I have to write everything down because I'll not remember things after. I mean, if you gave me just a postcode to remember, I couldn't remember. I can remember maybe the first 4 characters, but I have to keep going back and looking at things.
Wow. So the ongoing impact is ongoing and it's continuous, and that's really interesting for someone. Personally, I've not suffered with PTSD, and we kind of get these various images from the media and we get our information from different sources, don't we? And it's really interesting. You've both done a lot of work and received treatment, and you're both talking about some of these ongoing, perhaps maybe less severe symptoms, but still very much impactful on your life. And that's really interesting to hear from you both about that. One thing I'm also interested on, as of course we all are with our time to change stuff, is the stigma and discrimination. I can only imagine that PTSD and complex PTSD is something that is kind of misunderstood, stigmatized, and that you've possibly been discriminated against. So I think if we can just go back to you, Lauren, have you personally ever felt stigmatized because of your PTSD?
I think more than anything else, I self-stigmatized because
okay.
of, like, I guess the social stigma with PTSD and the way it's portrayed in the media, and especially on TV, that people with PTSD are dangerous, which we're not.
Wow. Yes. Okay. Yeah.
Again,
because it doesn't think we can only come from our own reference point, can't we? Because it never occurred to me to think that either you or Rhys would be dangerous because of your PTSD. But now you're kind of, you think about the media and certain film portrayals and things. Now you've said it, I can see where people might. So wow, okay, yeah.
It's I guess because there's a significant stereotype about PTSD only coming from war or conflict.
Yes.
That sometimes somebody who hasn't gone through that, like obviously I haven't been in a war, been in conflict, that the trauma you've gone through isn't enough.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. Wow. That is very stigmatizing, actually, when you think about it.
It's like the MP that recently was signed off work with PTSD.
Oh yes.
I've
forgotten her name, but fairly young, wasn't she? Is she in her 20s, I think?
She's about 24.
Yeah.
And there were there's a couple of comments and they quite upset me, actually. They were like, well, which war did you fight in?
Yeah. There's clearly a lack of understanding and education around what PTSD is for people to make comments like that, isn't there?
Yeah, it's
thank you, Lauren.
Yeah, it's quite invalidating, really.
Yeah. Rhys, have you ever been kind of stigmatized or discriminated against, or what are your thoughts on the subject?
Well, with me, because the experience I went through, when I returned to work after being off work for 8 weeks, maybe 9 weeks, I returned to work. On the day I returned to work, I was made unemployed.
Oh, wow.
And
for what reason?
It's the way some organizations and some line managers take advantage of situations.
Wow, okay. Sorry to hear that.
So on top of everything else that went on, I also had that sudden change.
Yeah.
And with all the impacts that happen that come along with the trauma and the reactive depression associated with what I went through, it just all piles up. So you get to a point where you find it difficult to actually find employment again.
And did you feel, it sounds as though, did you feel you were sort of directly discriminated against by your employer because you had been off work for PTSD?
It's a combination of things, but you just feel that it's very, very difficult ever to really go forward again into the job market, because how do you explain all these absences?
Yeah, wow.
Because they always ask for information about why you were off for that period of time. And if you already have some mental health issues and then you have this added on top of it, it becomes incredibly difficult to find employment.
And for me, how I think about it is it's because of that misunderstanding and stigma, and people, certainly with job applications, and I don't want to go too far down the road with this, but it's that stigma and discrimination and misunderstanding. People will see a box ticked or a condition described on a form and make a whole host of assumptions, which I think might be quite one way to sort of wrap up our conversation is just to think about, I'll ask each of you what you think is like the biggest myth or stigma associated with PTSD that you would like to change. And again, if we go to you first, Lauren, just put you on the spot there. Rhys, have a think.
Oh, well, this is a bit of a tricky one, actually. I guess I've kind of stuck with two, because the top one is PTSD can happen after any trauma.
Yeah.
And that because trauma is subjective. What one person finds traumatic is going to be different to like what somebody else does.
Yeah.
And the other one is because so two people could go through the exact same traumatic event, and one person could develop PTSD and the other one won't. It's like,
yes, okay, yeah.
There's like a perception that because you develop PTSD that you're weak.
Oh gosh, which is just completely wrong.
Yeah, that's the other thing. I do not agree with that in any respect.
It sounds as though, Lauren, we might need a whole other discussion about the list of things that that need to change and the stereotypes and the myths. But we'll just come on to you, Rhys. Is there one or maybe two or three, depending, is there anything in particular that you think really is a stigma or a myth that you would really like to bust?
It's about just viewing it as people thinking that you're just being soft and man up.
Yeah, not as simple as that at all by the sounds of it, and what you've both described and the treatment. I think that's a really, really, really important point. And I'd just like to say thank you both for sharing so openly and honestly your experiences today. And I do believe when we share this video and this recording, we will put some links into it's PTSD UK, the charity, just to signpost people to. So if anybody's listening and or watching this and you've had your own experiences and you may be looking for some support, we will add some information as well. And again, I'd just like to say thank you very much to both of you, Lauren and Rhys. Thank you and bye for now.